Hi, UUCP. I'm here with Dave Bellama, and many of you have had the pleasure to sing with him, work with him, collaborate with him. And this is the first of our musicians interviews series to learn a little bit more about the different musicians of our congregation and actually a way for us to learn a little bit more about each other than we could even before this pandemic. So I'm just going to ask Dave some questions about what he does musically so that we can all learn a little bit more about him. So the first question is, Dave, what instrument or instruments do you play? And can you tell us a little bit about your instruments? Because I actually don't know much about your instrument.
Okay. Well, thanks. My main instrument is and always has been the five-string banjo. Um, Although over the years I've played a lot of auto harp, uh, blues harps, and guitar. Um, I think that sometimes I guess I learned to play guitar because sometimes I would be someplace and didn't have the banjo and they wanted some music. So it's not too hard to make the transition from banjo to guitar. Anyway, five-string banjo is an American instrument in many ways. It originally came from Africa, and it was a gourd instrument with a couple of strings, and was played in a fashion that, and I saw this when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa. It was played in a fashion that we still play the five-string banjo the same way, but it came over and with the Africans. It was played on the plantations. There was music that was always done in the slave quarters. What's interesting about the banjo is how it was then co-opted or shared, maybe we should say, and became an instrument that white people played too. Somewhere along the line, it went from two strings to four. It always had a gut head. Um, Actually, I have this right here. This part right here.
Okay.
And it was always gut. It's plastic now, but when I bought my first banjo back in probably 1961, I want to say, it had a gut head. Um, and somewhere along the line, somebody added a fifth string, which is this little thing right here. It's shorter
Okay.
than
I
all
was
the other strings. It
wondering
never
about that
changes.
fifth string because to me that's unusual. Like to have
Yeah,
five strings. Normally it's like an even number, I think.
yeah, that's true. Guitars have six strings. Well, that string never changes. You don't fret it ever. And some people say that it was added because of the music. A lot of the music that you play the banjo on derives from African American folk music from the early years, uh, or from Scots Irish ballads and dances that were brought over by a lot of the white people who ended up populating the South. And Scottish music, of course, has this drone. Bagpipe has a drone at the top, and it never changes. And it's the same thing with the five-string banjo. So that instrument developed through the years. It actually became a parlor instrument among the upper class in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. It was played quite a bit differently. It was fingered like sort of like a harp, I think. Um, but over the years, it's really developed in two directions. One would be the old time picking, which we call up picking or down picking, claw hammer, because your hand is shaped like a claw and you go down like this, or up picking, where you lead with either the index finger or the middle finger and brush with your other fingers and then thumb the fifth string, which never changes. So that's the style. Um, the old time style is very different from the bluegrass style. The bluegrass style is what most people are familiar with, and that's the three finger fast picking that you hear from Flatt and Scruggs and the bluegrass groups. Now, we all play the same music, but it's done in a little bit different style. I learned that old style picking, and the reason I learned it, when I was young, I liked music. I liked folk music a lot. Those were the days of Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and the Kingston Trio and Joan Baez, and I loved that folk music. My mom said, "Well, you should play the piano," and she got me piano lessons. But the piano teacher finally came to her and said, "Ma'am, you're wasting your money. He can't read the music. He just can't do it. It's just everything we do, he can't do it. He can play some things by ear, and I've trained him a little bit in that, but he just can't read the music." But I had a friend who said, "Well, why don't you play the banjo? I have one." He said, "You don't have to read music for that. There isn't any written music." And he showed me just a basic strum, which I think was about all he knew. He wasn't really an advanced banjo player or anything. And he said, "This will get you started, but you'll have to go the rest of the way you're by yourself." And so I did. I listened to a lot of records, mostly old time stuff, because that's what I liked. And that's how I learned the up picking style and the claw hammer and the two finger, which is generally these two fingers, and just kept working with that through the years. And then later on learned the bluegrass style. The music was really what drove me. Banjo, I think, is important for two things. One, it's an accompaniment to folk music or old time country music or bluegrass, and it's lent its character to the music. But the important thing is the songs, and that's what always drew me. The songs tell a story, or the songs are written to celebrate an event, or the songs are protest, and that's what I grew up on. And the other thing, though, is over the years, banjo, like a lot of instruments, has become an instrument for performing. You do some really intricate instrumentals on it. And if you notice the style of bluegrass, people will sing a verse, sing the chorus, verse, chorus, and then do an instrumental. That instrumental always gets plugged in. So sometimes they can be just straightforward melody, sometimes they can be pretty fancy. And that's what I learned. You know, sometimes I'm straightforward, sometimes I might get a little bit fancy, although less and less as the years go by. But that's what I grew up listening to. I still love those old songs. And places, you asked where did I play?
Yes, I'm very curious about that actually because I think the venues that you've played in are they're interesting to me. It's unique.
Well, we played in the early years in people's living rooms, on their porches, and around campfires in the backyard, which was a real challenge because when you play a gut head banjo and you're next to a fire, which I was a lot, the hotter it gets, it changes the tone.
Oh, that's actually like a very treacherous
Yeah,
performing aspect. Nobody does that, like you're right next to something that's going to put you out of tune.
yeah, all the time. And people always make jokes about banjo players. They say, well, you know, half the time they're tuning, the rest of the time they're playing out of tune. But that happened. It happened. You get a little bit changing in temperature, and you just really got to retune. Plus the fact that on a banjo, you have 5 or 6. I have probably 4 different tunings that I use all the time, and another 4 or 5 that I use on different songs. There's a G tuning, a C tuning, a modal tuning, a minor tuning, sawmill tuning. There's a double D. There's just these different tunings. And of course, you got different fingerings depending on the tuning. So you move from one song to the next, and to suit your voice, maybe you have to change your tuning. So that's why we tune all the time. But as I say, we played around a lot in campfires. Where I went to college was really a developing ground for me because it was a hotbed of folk music in those days. I went to school outside of Philadelphia, and that was the heavy days of the folk music revival. We had people like Pete Seeger and Odetta and some of the real Joan Baez and some of the real folk music names come to the school and play. And there were a lot of musicians, and we played all the time. We played on the porches, we played around the fires, we played in the lawns, we played everywhere. And I learned so many songs. And those, of course, were the early years of the heady protests, civil rights, and we were still singing labor songs, and we were writing songs right and left to suit the occasions. And I always did that. I love to do that. Take an old song and just add new words to it. and you've seen that because you use a very fertile ground for writing songs. And the people that I learned from who did that, Woody Guthrie and those people, would always take a very serious topic and mix some humor and some real deep messages into it. And I like to do that. I think that's the You Talking Blues is an example of that. You know, there's some humor in there, but there's also a message. Anyway, as time went on, I took the banjo to Africa, played in Africa even. And the children loved it. I used to play old black spirituals over there. And it wasn't anything they knew, but they liked it. They really did. And they weren't surprised by the instrument because they'd seen something similar. It just had two strings, and so I played over there. And in the 70s, I got together with some friends. This was in New Mexico, Santa Fe. We formed a group called the Santa Fe River Bottom Band. And we played old time folk music and country music and some bluegrass and dance music. And we would play in the clubs. We had a regular weekend gig that we would go to. We played weddings, we played parties, we played funerals, we played just about everything on a regular basis. And we played in Santa Fe all over. We played the ski runs, we played in Albuquerque, we went down to Socorro, we went everywhere and played. And there were 5 of us, banjo, fiddle, mandolin, stand-up bass, and a guitar. And it went on for years, decades. When I wasn't in Africa, I was there playing music with them. So we got into everywhere doing that. We played elections. We wrote songs, and I played in the UU too back in those days in Santa Fe. Just the same what I do here. Wrote songs for them and played protest songs and old spirituals and whatever it is that seemed like it would fit with the service and the community. So that went on, and haven't really played in a group steadily here since retiring and coming to Arizona in 2008. But I get together with people and we play. We've formed a couple of little groups, which I think the folks at UU have seen, the Dissidents and the Heretics. And so I like to play at UU whenever I can and with other musicians. I think part of the fun about playing an instrument like the banjo is playing with other people, because making harmony with other instruments, not just the voices, but the instruments. There's putting in the runs in between verses, or doing a backup when somebody else is leading on the melody. That's what the banjo is made for. And I love to do that. The other thing that I've been doing for 6 or 7 years now is playing in the assisted living homes. And this is through a group called Audrey's Angels that it's a nonprofit that works with the smaller residential homes of 6, 8 people. They're generally folks that can't afford to go into a well-off assisted living home, so they really go into one that provides just the basics. they turn over their Social Security check and they get a bed, and generally in a shared room, and they get their food, and they get a TV in the living room, and that's basically what they do. So I go in there once a week to one house or another and lead them in sing-alongs or play songs. And what they like is what I like. They love the songs that they grew up with. So I end up doing a lot of old time Americana uh, songs that they recognize and can sing along to. Or there's some really touching moments that come out of that. Even I remember singing "You Are My Sunshine" one time, and a lady came over and sat down in front of me, and she just had tears running out of her eyes, and she says, "You know, that was my mom's song for us when we were growing up, and she always sang that to us every day." And she says, "You are my sunshines." And when she died, she says, "Whenever you hear that song, that will be me singing to you." You know, the songs hold memories for these folks. And music, they say, is one of the last things to go. There was another home where I would say a third to maybe even half, and in some houses more, of the people just don't move much. You don't know whether they're there or not. You might see their toe tapping a little bit. But there's others that participate, but there's some that just don't. And one day I was playing in a home, and there was a lady there who hadn't moved in the time that I'd known her. And all of a sudden she piped up and said, "Can you play," and what was it? And the band played on, I think was the song. It was an old song. So I said, "Well, I know the song, but I've never played it." And she didn't even wait for me. She started singing it. She sang a verse all the way through, and then she lapsed back into silence and just started staring straight ahead again. And that was it. When I left, I said goodbye to her, but she didn't even respond. So I said, "Well, I'm going to be ready the next time." So next time I went in, I had a couple of verses of the song ready, and I started singing it, and she joined in. And we sang it together all the way through. We got to the end, and then she just sort of started staring straight ahead again. And then she piped up and asked me for another song, and then proceeded to sing it. And the caretakers were just standing there scratching their heads saying, "We never saw this before. She never says anything." You know, and she never did say anything else. It was just that. So you never know what's going on with these folks. But what you do know with a lot of them is that they know the songs, and they'll often say, "That brings back the memories," or "Thank you for those memories you brought today." And that's a hard thing not to do. If you can do it, you need to do it, you know. Uh, so
That's so interesting. Well, it's something, it's something I've noticed about working with you is that your music has always been about other people and being very inclusive to your listeners. Like you're definitely always thinking about your audience and reaching your audience with whatever music that that is meaningful to them. And also when you work with other people, I remember I often I'm a little nervous when we collaborate because I know you can play anything by ear, and I'm more of like a reader musician, and you always say, "Oh, let's just see how all of this sounds together," or even
mhm.
if it's an uncommon like, mix of instruments, you say, "Oh, it's just about all being together, all playing together. Like anybody can play with us if they want to." And that's actually somewhat rare to find in the music world. I think that a musician is always thinking about their audience, or just the simple fact that the main goal is that we're being inclusive with our
It's,
music making.
it is, I think, it's to get people singing or thinking or humming. I mean, that's one thing I love about the UU congregation is they're ready to sing all the time. Um, and UU has people of a certain age, many of the congregations, which works for me too, because I know those songs and they know them, and some of my, I have to say, most precious moments at UU. I remember doing, I think this was before you came on, but there were 3 or 4 years there where I did like a Woody Guthrie music service. The entire service was Woody Guthrie songs, me and other musicians, and each one of us would, one person or one group would take one song, and then I would do an intro and explain the background of the next song. And we just did that. We did a Pete Seeger service. We did a bunch of them like that. But I can remember during the Pete Seeger service singing one of those songs. It might have been "Where Have All the Flowers Gone?" But there were tears streaming down people's cheeks. Some people who clearly the harmony on the song, because I wasn't doing it by myself. I think there were several of us up there doing it. Took them back, and they were singing along and crying, and it was something to behold. I really liked that. I really liked that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess this takes us to our kind of my final questions. How do you keep that going in a pandemic?
Well, first of all, I like what Benji's doing, where he gets all these screens together and has the choir singing. And I mean, last week he brought in Russ and Ileana and Fred, from out of town, or who people that we haven't seen. He just did that, and he brought everybody in. I mean, that's just beautiful. I know it's not everybody can do that, but that's just really outstanding. The Zoom thing that we're doing with the assistance living homes works. This was actually an idea that was dreamed up by a high school student who did it as his Eagle Scout project, and set the whole thing up for us and worked with us. He also likes to play piano for the homes. And I don't do this because I haven't had the opportunity, but I know of some of my fellow musicians. They will get together on a back porch or something, or in a backyard, and play and have a little socially distant parties. And the times come where it's possible to do that. And it takes a little bit of effort, but people are moving towards that, and I think we can do that. It's given me the opportunity to do a little personal work on the banjo too. I've never practiced very much. I never was motivated to just sit there and practice. I preferred playing songs together with people or for people or with other musicians. But this time I kind of sat down and went through my list of, I started keeping this.
Wow.
When I was in high school, actually. I think that it's got 400, the last page right now is 412. They're just songs that I always wanted to, that was back in the days before you could look stuff up on the internet. If you wanted to remember a song, after you heard it, you quick ran home and wrote it down.
Wow. And you have to remember it too.
Yeah.
And then write it down.
And here's another thing. If you didn't remember it right, well, you just sang it the way you remembered it. And that's why there's so many different versions of a folk song, because people didn't hear it right or didn't remember it right, I would discover songs years and years and years later. I would hear an original version of it and realize that I had been singing it wrong all those years because I didn't hear it right. But other people sang it wrong too, because there's no wrong.
I was about to say it's a more flexible tradition than other traditions.
There's no wrong, and even tunes don't have to be the same. I mean, I don't reckon that I play a song twice the same way. It just depends on what's going on. Do an extra break, sure. Leave the break out, okay. Do a half a break. I don't remember the line to this, so just go wow, 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 or make it up. It all works.
It sounds like a context based
Yeah,
music making instead of just like being like concrete, almost unmovable. It's very, very, very flexible.
I
Wow.
think though that the virus is a time for some of us to just work on things and maybe learn something new, um, or go back and relearn something that we lost or forgot along the way. I've definitely done that. Uh, and do whatever electronic digital stuff that we can do, because there are ways. Obviously we've seen that, and so I like to do that and like to put down songs and send them to Benji, and he can use them whenever he wants. Did the same thing for Audrey's Angels, put down a bunch of songs and video and sent them to them and said, send them on to the homes whenever you want. I'm not there for this, but it doesn't matter. Um, so
That's great. Yes, that's a great positive things to think about during the pandemic for musicians. Do you
yeah.
have any kind of final words for the all the musicians out there during the pandemic? Of things you think we can do to stay connected musically?
Well, music is a gift to people. There's always something special about live music, and live can be over Zoom too, or it's just different from an online recording that you buy. Or I mean, that's how come I never worry about getting up and forgetting a verse or making a mistake or whatever, because I don't think it much matters to people. Or if your voice isn't that good, and mine's just getting worse. But it doesn't much matter because it's live. And so I would just say, whenever you got the opportunity to go out there and do something live, even socially distanced or whatever, do it. And if you're motivated to work on something at home to make it just a little bit better, or learn a new lick, and then try to get a chance to use it. But keep doing it, because it is a gift. It is a gift to the people that you're sharing it with, even though it's very much a gift back to us as the musicians.
For sure. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Dave. I learned a lot about the banjo and about your performance history, and a lot of good ideals about what we should be thinking about when we're making music right now. So thank you so much for sharing.
Well, it's a great idea. I'm happy to do it. And I look forward to hearing some of the things from the other the other musicians. I hope somebody interviews you.
Oh, oh goodness, I haven't thought about that. But we'll see. We'll kind of probably get a collection of kind of narratives of
Hmm.
all of the different backgrounds that we have in
Hmm.
our congregation. I think it's something that's untapped and that we don't really know much
Hmm.
about yet. So thank you for
All right.
being the first
It's a
musician
pleasure.
to
Thank you, Mary.